What if the biggest gamble in Raiders history isn't a player, but a 73-year-old coaching legend? Pete Carroll, the mastermind behind the Seahawks Super Bowl dynasty, has taken over in Las Vegas. But here's the problem. He didn't exactly leave Seattle on top. In fact, many believe he was forced out after years of decline. Now he's walking into a franchise that has devoured head coaches for years. Will he revive the Raiders, building a team tough enough to survive the brutal AFC West? Or will his old-school philosophy and stubborn loyalty to his ways tear this team apart before they even get started? This isn't just another coaching change. This is a high-stakes experiment that could either make the Raiders contenders or send them into complete disaster. Let's break down the truth about Pete Carroll's Raiders takeover. Will he save or destroy the franchise? The Raiders crisis before Pete Carroll. Before Pete Carroll's arrival, the Raiders were a franchise in turmoil. Once known for toughness and swagger, they had become a model of instability, dysfunction, and failure. Coaching disasters, failed draft picks, and a crumbling culture left the team desperate for leadership. Carroll's hiring wasn't just a strategic move. It was a last-ditch effort to restore order. A revolving door of coaching disasters. The Raiders' biggest problem was their inability to find and keep a stable head coach. A team cannot build a winning culture when leadership changes every other season. John Gruden's scandal. Gruden's sudden resignation in 2021 after a leaked email scandal threw the franchise into chaos. His exit shattered the team's long-term vision, leaving the Raiders scrambling. The Josh McDaniels disaster, hired to bring championship experience. McDaniels failed spectacularly. His offense regressed, relationships with players collapsed, and the team spiraled into dysfunction. Fired by mid-2023, he became another failed experiment. Antonio Pierce's short-term fix. Pierce injected energy into the team, but ownership didn't see him as the long-term answer. By 2024, the Raiders had cycled through 4 head coaches in 3 years. Roster struggles and poor drafting. Beyond coaching, the front office consistently failed at roster building. Draft mistakes and weak free agent decisions left the team uncompetitive. First-round draft busts. The Raiders wasted key picks on players like Henry Ruggs III, legal trouble, Damon Arnett, cut early, and Alex Leatherwood, released after 1 season. Quarterback chaos. The team moved on from Derek Carr, but had no solid replacement. Jimmy Garoppolo flopped, Aiden O'Connell was unproven, and the team lacked a long-term solution at quarterback. A franchise desperate for leadership, the Raiders had 4 head coaches in 3 years, no clear quarterback plan, multiple draft failures, a broken locker room, and fading identity. Pete Carroll's arrival was meant to change all of that, but at 73 years old, could he still be the right man to lead a franchise in complete disarray? Or was this just another desperate move that would backfire? Pete Carroll's coaching legacy, can he fix the Raiders? When the Raiders announced Pete Carroll as their new head coach, reactions were mixed. On one hand, he's a legendary coach, a Super Bowl champion, and a master motivator. On the other, he's 73 years old, coming off a turbulent exit from Seattle and stepping into a franchise that has been drowning in dysfunction for years. Some say Carroll is exactly what the Raiders need, an experienced leader who can rebuild a broken culture. Others argue that his best days are behind him and that the NFL has passed him by. But before we decide whether Carroll will save or sink the Raiders, we need to understand who he really is and what his coaching philosophy brings to the table. A coach who's seen it all. Pete Carroll's career has been anything but ordinary. He's won at the highest level, but he's also faced brutal failures. He's built dynasties and watched them crumble. His journey through the NFL and college football is a mix of brilliance, controversy, and reinvention. Carroll's coaching style isn't like everyone else's. He doesn't just preach football, he builds cultures. He emphasizes energy, passion, and an unrelenting competitive spirit. His always compete mantra has turned underdogs into stars and transformed struggling teams into contenders. But can that philosophy work in Las Vegas? The Raiders are unlike any team Carroll has coached before. Their recent history is chaos, their roster is incomplete, and their future is uncertain. The blueprint for success or failure? Carroll has already proven he can take a franchise from the bottom to the top. When he took over the Seattle Seahawks in 2010, they were a team stuck in mediocrity. Just 4 years later, they were Super Bowl champions. He built a historically dominant defense, developed late-round draft picks into superstars, and turned Seattle into one of the toughest teams in the NFL. But his success wasn't just about talent, it was about culture. His players loved playing for him, his teams fought hard, his methods worked. That was nearly a decade ago. The NFL has changed. The game is faster, the strategies are different, and Carroll's last few seasons in Seattle weren't exactly smooth. His once elite defense fell apart. His franchise quarterback, Russell Wilson, turned against against him. The team struggled to stay competitive. So the real question isn't whether Pete Carroll was a great coach. I mean, we know he was. The question is whether he still is, and whether he can adapt to an NFL that looks very different from the one he dominated years ago. The Raiders, Carroll's toughest challenge. Yet, Las Vegas is no easy fix. Carroll isn't walking into a team that just needs a tweak here and there. He's inheriting a franchise in total disarray. The Raiders have no franchise quarterback, just a mix of question marks and temporary solutions, a defense full of holes, despite having stars like Max Crosby, a roster with major gaps due to years of poor drafting and free agent failures, a divided locker room where coaches and players haven't been on the same page for years. Carroll has never taken on a challenge quite like this. When he arrived in Seattle, he had time to rebuild. In Las Vegas, there is no time. Fans are impatient. The front office is under pressure. The Raiders need results now. Can Pete Carroll handle that kind of urgency? Can his coaching philosophy survive in a team that's been running on dysfunction? Or is this just another big-name hire that's destined to fail? Right now, there are more questions than answers. And until Carroll steps onto the field and proves he can bring the Raiders back to life, those questions will only grow louder. Pete Carroll's vision for the Raiders. Will it work? Pete Carroll didn't come to Las Vegas just to play it safe. He came with a vision, a plan to reshape the Raiders in his image. But what does that actually look like? Building a new culture, energy, competition, and buy-in. One of Carroll's biggest strengths has always been building culture. He thrives on creating an environment where players want to compete every single day. His always compete mantra is more than a slogan. It's a way of life. Whether you're a star player or a rookie, you're constantly fighting for your job. That mindset built one of the most dominant defenses in NFL history with the Seahawks. But can it work in Las Vegas? The Raiders' locker room hasn't exactly been a model of unity. Under McDaniels, tension and frustration boiled over. Players felt disconnected. Leadership was questioned. Losing seasons drained the team's confidence. Carroll's first challenge? Getting the players to buy in. Can he earn the trust of veterans like Davante Adams and Max Crosby? Will his energy and positivity resonate with a roster that has been through years of dysfunction? Or will the Raiders' toxic past prove too much for even Carroll to fix? Changing culture takes time, but in Las Vegas, time is running out. Fixing the roster, Carroll's philosophy versus reality. Carroll has always believed in building through the draft, finding young, hungry players who fit his system. But the Raiders' recent draft history has been a disaster. If Carroll wants to turn things around, he'll need to fix the mistakes of the past and build a team that can compete. But does he have the resources to do it? Quarterback is still a massive question mark. The defense has talent but lacks depth. The offensive line needs major improvement. In Seattle, Carroll had years to develop his roster. In Las Vegas, he'll have just one offseason to prove he can build a winner. Can he find the right players and build a team that actually fits his system? Or will the Raiders' long history of poor roster decisions continue to haunt them? Clashing with the front office? Another challenge looms. Carroll isn't just a head coach. He's a personality, a leader, a force of nature. And that kind of presence doesn't always mix well with the front office. Mark Davis has already gone through multiple coaches trying to find the right fit. If Carroll's vision doesn't align with the Raiders' brass, how long before tensions rise? Will he have full control over personnel decisions? Will the front office give him the time he needs to rebuild? Or will this become yet another power struggle that ends in disaster? The biggest challenges Pete Carroll will face in Las Vegas. Pete Carroll is stepping into a pressure cooker. The Raiders don't just need a coach, they need a miracle worker. And as much as Carroll has succeeded in the past, Las Vegas presents a whole new set of challenges, some of which might be too much for even him to handle. The quarterback dilemma, who's the guy? Pete Carroll's system has always thrived on smart, tough, and mobile quarterbacks. He built a dynasty in Seattle with Russell Wilson, who fit his philosophy perfectly. A quarterback who could make plays outside the pocket and take care of the football. Now Carroll has to look at the Raiders' quarterback situation and ask himself, do I have a guy who can actually win games? Because right now it's not looking great. Jimmy Garoppolo flamed out and was a disaster in 2023. Aiden O'Connell showed flashes but isn't proven. The Raiders didn't draft a future superstar yet. If Carroll doesn't find his quarterback fast, everything else will fall apart. His entire coaching philosophy is built on having the right leader under center. So what does he do? Does he gamble on O'Connell and try to develop him? Does he push for a trade to bring in a veteran? Or does he completely blow it up and start fresh in the draft? The answer to this question might determine his entire fate in Las Vegas. Fixing a defense that has been a disaster for years. Pete Carroll is known for defensive dominance. His Legion of Boom defense in Seattle terrorized the league and won him a Super Bowl. Carroll. But here's the reality. The Raiders' defense has been bad for a long time. Sure, they have Max Crosby, one of the best pass rushers in the game, but outside of him, the defense has been a mess. The secondary has been one of the worst in the league. The linebackers lack depth and playmaking ability. The defense consistently collapses in big moments. Carroll thrives on aggressive, fast, and disciplined defenses, but can he fix the Raiders' mess in just one offseason? Or will it take years before his vision actually works? Surviving the AFC West, the toughest division in football. Even if Pete Carroll fixes the Raiders, he has to deal with one brutal reality. The AFC West is an absolute nightmare. Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs aren't going anywhere. Justin Herbert and the Chargers have an elite offense. The Denver Broncos, despite their struggles, are rebuilding fast. This isn't like the NFC West, where Carroll had years to establish dominance. If he doesn't win quickly, the Raiders will get buried in their own division. Can Carroll find a way to outcoach some of the best minds in football? Or is he walking into a division where his team will always be second best? The age factor. Can Carroll still keep up? There's another factor that nobody wants to talk about, but it can't be ignored. Pete Carroll is 73 years old. He's the oldest coach in the NFL. And while he still has energy, coaching at the highest level takes everything out of you. Can Carroll still connect with younger players the way he used to? Can he adjust to a league that is evolving faster than ever? Will his old school philosophy still work in the modern NFL? The truth is, Carroll's biggest challenge might not be the Raiders. It might be time itself. Can he reinvent himself in a league that is constantly changing? Or will this be the moment where we finally see Pete Carroll slow down? What happens if Pete Carroll fails? Pete Carroll was brought to Las Vegas as the man who could fix the mess. The Raiders didn't just hire a coach, they hired a legend, a Super Bowl champion, a culture builder, a man with decades of experience in turning struggling teams into contenders. But here's the problem. What if it doesn't work? What if despite all the excitement, all the experience, and all the optimism, Carroll can't turn this team around? The consequences of failure wouldn't just affect the Raiders. They could permanently damage Pete Carroll's legacy. And if history tells us anything, failure in Las Vegas won't just be a setback, it could be a disaster. Carroll's legacy, a Hall of Fame career on the line. Pete Carroll has done it all. He turned USC into a powerhouse and won 2 national championships. He built the Seattle Seahawks into an NFL dynasty and won a Super Bowl. He revolutionized coaching with his energy, creativity, and leadership. But in sports, you're only as good as your last season. Right now, Carroll is a Hall of Fame lock. But what happens if his Raiders tenure ends in failure? Will people start questioning if he was carried by Russell Wilson and the Legion of Boom? Will his reputation take a hit if he can't succeed without a superstar quarterback? Will this final chapter be remembered as an unnecessary mistake, one that he should have avoided? Great coaches know when to walk away. Did Carroll make the wrong decision by taking on one last challenge? If Carroll fails, the Raiders spiral even further. The Raiders are already one of the most unstable franchises in the NFL. If Carroll fails, things could go from bad to worse, fast. Another failed coaching hire means even more instability. The roster will once again be thrown into chaos. Star players like Max Crosby and Davante Adams might want out. Ownership will be pressured to completely tear everything down. Failure under Carroll wouldn't just be about losing games. It could set the Raiders back years. They've already spent 2 decades trying to recover from bad hires and poor decisions. Can they afford another failure at head coach? How much time does Carroll really have? When a new coach is hired, there's usually a grace period, a few years to build the team, implement a system, and develop players. But Pete Carroll, he won't get that luxury. The NFL is a win-now league, and the Raiders' ownership, front office, and fan base aren't patient. If Carroll doesn't show real progress in year 1, the pressure will start to build fast. A losing record in 2024? The whispers of doubt begin. A disastrous 2025? The calls for his firing will grow louder. By 2026, if the Raiders aren't competing, the Carroll experiment will be over. This isn't a long-term rebuild. Carroll has to win now, or risk being another name on the long list of Raiders coaching failures. Would the Raiders be forced into a full rebuild? If Carroll can't get this team back on track, what's left for the Raiders? They don't have a long-term quarterback. Their roster is built to win now, not in 3 years. Ownership has already cycled through multiple coaches with no real success. If Carroll fails, the Raiders might have no choice but to blow everything up. Trade away star players. Start from scratch with a new coaching staff. Tank for a top draft pick and completely rebuild the franchise. franchise. And after years of frustration, would Raiders fans be willing to sit through another painful rebuild? The pressure is on and time is running out. Pete Carroll has been in pressure-filled situations before. He's coached in Super Bowls, college championships, and some of the biggest games in football history, but this might be the highest stakes challenge of his entire career. If he succeeds, he cements his legacy as one of the greatest coaches of all time. If he fails, he risks ending his career in disappointment. And for the Raiders, this is their last shot at stability. If this doesn't work, then what? The final verdict. Will Pete Carroll save or destroy the Raiders? Pete Carroll wasn't brought to Las Vegas to be just another coach. He was hired to be a savior. After years of dysfunction, failed leadership, and a culture of losing, the Raiders needed a proven winner, someone who could command respect, build a competitive team, and bring back the identity that once made this franchise great. And yet, hiring a legendary coach doesn't guarantee success. Pete Carroll has the pedigree, experience, and leadership qualities to turn the Raiders around. But does he have the right situation? Could this be the moment that revives the Raiders' golden era? Or is Carroll walking into a situation that's destined for failure? Let's break down the three biggest factors that will determine his fate. Factor number one, can Carroll adapt to a changing NFL? Pete Carroll built his career on an old-school philosophy, dominant defense, a strong running game, and an intense competitive culture. But the NFL has changed. The league is now driven by high-powered offenses and elite quarterback play. Defensive-minded head coaches have struggled to keep up with offensive innovators. The Raiders don't have a clear quarterback solution, a major problem in today's game. Can Carroll adjust? If he finds the right offensive coordinator and develops a strong passing attack, his tenure could be a success. If he sticks to outdated coaching methods, the game may pass him by. The Raiders aren't built like his old Seahawks teams, which means Carroll will have to evolve to make this work. Factor number two, the quarterback question. Who will lead the Raiders? No coach can win in the NFL without the right quarterback, and for Pete Carroll, this might be the biggest challenge of all. Right now, the Raiders don't have an answer at QB. Jimmy Garoppolo flamed out and won't be the long-term guy. Aiden O'Connell has potential, but is he a true franchise quarterback? Will the Raiders draft a young star or bring in a proven veteran? Carroll's success in Seattle was tied to Russell Wilson's elite play. Without a quarterback at that level, can he build a winning team in Las Vegas? If the Raiders fail to secure a top-tier quarterback, Carroll's time in Vegas might be doomed before it even begins. Factor number three, how much time does he really have? Pete Carroll isn't a young coach building for the future. At 73 years old, he doesn't have a decade to turn this team around. The Raiders need results fast. If Carroll wins immediately, he could stabilize the franchise and lead them back to playoff contention. If the team struggles early, the pressure will be overwhelming. Ownership, the front office, and the fan base won't wait 5 years for a rebuild. They expect wins now. Carroll must deliver quickly or risk being another short-lived Raiders coaching experiment. So what's the verdict? Will Pete Carroll be the man who finally saves the Raiders, or will his hiring be remembered as another failed gamble by a desperate franchise? Right now, the answer isn't clear, and that's what makes this story so fascinating. If Carroll adapts to the modern NFL, finds the right quarterback, and builds a winning culture, he could cement his legacy as one of the greatest coaches of all time. But if he can't overcome the Raiders' dysfunction, struggles to develop a quarterback, and fails to deliver wins, his time in Vegas could end in disaster. One thing is for sure, this will be one of the most unpredictable coaching hires in NFL history. The question now is simple. Which version of Pete Carroll will we see? The legendary winner or a coach who stayed in the game too long? Only time will tell.